The grand hall of São Paulo's historic church glowed with a golden light streaming through its century-old stained glass windows. Marina, a 28-year-old bride, looked radiant in her delicate wedding gown, designed to accentuate her elegant silhouette. Her deep brown eyes sparkled with emotion as she walked down the aisle, taking in the white flowers that adorned each pew. Carlos, standing confidently at the altar, was 32 and looked impeccable in a navy blue suit that reflected his polished image as a successful businessman. Over the past 2 years, he had won not only Marina's heart but also the admiration of her family. The ceremony began, led by the priest, when the heavy wooden doors of the church suddenly creaked open. A man, approximately 40 years old and wearing a tailored gray suit, entered with a determined stride. His commanding presence caused a ripple of murmurs among the guests. "This wedding cannot proceed," his deep voice echoed through the church. "Carlos Mendez is not who he claims to be." Marina felt the air leave her lungs as she turned toward Carlos, searching his eyes for reassurance. Instead, she found something unfamiliar: panic. The stranger continued, stepping closer to the altar. "Carlos Roberto da Silva, your real name, is under investigation for orchestrating an elaborate fraud scheme that has left many people financially devastated." The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Marina stood frozen, her gaze darting between Carlos and the man who had disrupted her wedding. 2 plainclothes officers quietly entered from the side doors, their presence confirming the gravity of the situation. Carlos grasped Marina's hands tightly, his eyes pleading. "Marina, my love, it's not true. I can explain everything," he stammered, his voice trembling. "What we have is real, I swear." But before he could offer any explanation, the officers had reached him. They restrained him and began leading him away. His desperate pleas echoed in the church. "Marina, please, believe me." Marina's once carefully arranged veil now felt heavy as lead on her shoulders. Her mother, Cecilia, rushed to support her trembling daughter, while her father, Roberto, attempted to calm the stunned guests. In mere moments, what had been envisioned as a perfect wedding day had descended into a public nightmare. The white flowers, the 3-tiered cake waiting at the reception hall, the rings yet to be exchanged, all now seemed part of an elaborate deception. Marina remained rooted at the altar, her legs unsteady, trying to process how the man she thought she knew so intimately, the man who made her laugh every morning and planned their future together, could be someone entirely different. The man who had interrupted the ceremony approached her, offering a business card. "Ricardo Almeida, Federal Police Investigator. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but we needed to act before it was too late." Marina, a respected financial manager at one of São Paulo's leading banks, had built a career defined by her dedication and professionalism. Her corner office on the 20th floor boasted a panoramic view of the city, a testament to her hard work since graduating in economics. She had met Carlos at an investment conference held at the prestigious Maxwood Plaza Hotel. He had been a keynote speaker, presenting himself as the director of a promising technology company. Their connection had felt immediate, their shared dreams seeming to align perfectly. Now, standing amid the shattered remnants of her dream wedding, Marina was left questioning how the man she had trusted with her heart had concealed such a devastating secret. Impressing everyone with his deep understanding of financial markets and startups, Carlos had effortlessly captured the attention of the crowd that day. Marina, typically cautious when it came to relationships, found herself drawn to the way he combined intelligence with humility. "You know what fascinates me most about finance," he had said during their first conversation, his green eyes locked on hers. "It's how numbers tell stories that words never could." That phrase had stayed with Marina, replaying in her mind now as she sat alone in her apartment, 2 weeks after her wedding had turned into a public scandal. She sifted through every moment they'd shared, searching for the red flags she must have missed. Her best friend, Patricia, was by her side, arranging teacups on the coffee table. "Mari, you need to eat something," she insisted, nudging a plate of cookies closer to her. Marina picked up a photo frame from the side table. It was a picture of her and Carlos in Campos do Jordão, their smiles glowing during what had been a romantic weekend getaway, or so she had thought. "How didn't I see it, Patty?" Marina's voice cracked. "He knew everything about me, how I always dreamed of a house with a sunroom, that I wanted 3 kids, even that I was terrified of heights." Memories flooded her mind, Carlos introducing her to his supposed business partners, all impeccably convincing, the social gatherings where he charmed her friends and family with tales of his childhood in Ribeirão Preto, stories she now knew were fabrications. "Remember the charity gala?" Marina asked, her voice trembling. 300 guests. We raised over $500,000 for that NGO. It was all fake. The investigator, Ricardo, had explained that Carlos, whose real name was Carlos Roberto, was notorious for orchestrating fraudulent charity events. The funds disappeared into offshore accounts, and the charities never saw a dime. Marina's mother, Cecilia, entered the apartment carrying a shopping bag. Since the incident at the church, she had practically moved in, worried about her daughter's emotional state. "Sweetheart," Cecilia began gently, "Dr. Ricardo called. He wants to meet with you tomorrow at his office. He says he's uncovered more information." Marina nodded, a sinking feeling growing in her stomach. Each new revelation about Carlos felt like a dagger twisting in her heart. The good morning texts, the breakfasts in bed, the plans for a honeymoon in Greece, their dreams of the future, how much of it had been real? One thought refused to leave her mind. She stood and gazed out the window. "Why me?" she murmured, breaking the silence. Why would he go to such lengths? Almost a year of his life, building this elaborate lie around me. Patricia and Cecilia exchanged worried glances. For the first time, Marina seemed less focused on mourning the betrayal and more intent on unraveling the mystery behind it. "Maybe it's time to follow up on what Dr. Ricardo mentioned about his past," Cecilia suggested cautiously. "Understanding why he did it might help you find some closure." Marina turned to face them, her expression resolute. "It's not just that, Mom," she said firmly. "Carlos had a knowledge of finance that goes beyond what you'd learn from basic research. He understood complex banking operations, things you can't fake. There's more to this than just a scam." Her voice carried a determination that hadn't been there before. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, Marina was ready to confront the deeper truths behind the man who had upended her life. A troubling thought began to take shape in Marina's mind: what if Carlos hadn't chosen her by chance? What if her job at the bank had somehow played a role in his elaborate scheme? Determined to uncover the truth, she grabbed her notebook and started going through old spreadsheets from her time as a financial manager. She had access to confidential information about major investments over the past 2 years. How many times had she casually mentioned critical transactions to Carlos, thinking she was just sharing details of her day with her fiancé? "I think I need to stop by the bank tomorrow," Marina said firmly, her voice regaining its strength. "Before my meeting with Dr. Ricardo." The next morning, Marina arrived at the bank earlier than usual. The mirrored facade of the building, once a symbol of her professional achievements, now seemed to harbor secrets she was desperate to uncover. Julia, her assistant of 3 years, looked startled to see her. "Marina. I didn't expect, it's good to see you back," Julia stammered, nervously adjusting her glasses. "I need to review some old transactions," Marina said, cutting to the chase. "Can you bring me reports from the last 2 years, particularly those tied to new startup investments?" As she waited, Marina stood by the window of her office, watching the city awaken. The rising sun reflected off neighboring buildings, creating a kaleidoscope of light that once inspired her. Now, each shimmer felt like it concealed another layer of truth waiting to be uncovered. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first file. The investment analyses she had overseen were all there, many of which she had casually discussed with Carlos during romantic dinners or leisurely Sunday mornings. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Renata, the compliance director, stepped into the office. "Marina, "Can we talk?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Renata's expression was grave, a look Marina recognized from their university days. It only appeared when something serious was at hand. "We've identified some irregularities in the due diligence processes for startups approved over the last 18 months, Renata began. "Coincidentally, all these companies have some connection to firms Carlos mentioned at social events." Marina's breath caught. On her desk was a photo of her and Carlos at one of those events, both smiling alongside so-called tech entrepreneurs. "The companies are real," Renata continued, "but their financial data was manipulated so expertly that it bypassed all our checks. Someone with insider knowledge of our review process must have been involved." "Are you saying I?" Marina couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "No," Renata replied quickly. "I've known you for years, Mari. I trust you. But I think someone exploited your access, your expertise in our processes, to make this work." Marina's mind raced as she opened her digital planner, recalling the times Carlos had shown up unannounced for lunch, always curious about her work, always asking seemingly innocent questions about the bank's operations. "I need to speak with Dr. Ricardo," Marina said abruptly, rising from her chair. "I think I've just uncovered part of the puzzle." On her way to the federal police office, Marina's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read simply, "Not everything was a lie. We need to talk. From the heart." Marina read the message again. Part of her wanted to ignore it, burying the memories of what once was. But another part, one that still clung to the fragments of their shared past, craved answers. At Dr. Ricardo's office, she uncovered more pieces of the puzzle. Carlos Roberto da Silva had a long history of sophisticated financial frauds, each involving the financial sector. But this time, something was different. "This isn't his usual pattern," Ricardo explained, pointing to a timeline of Carlos's criminal activities. "He typically executes the scheme and vanishes within months. With you, it lasted nearly 2 years. And the other women?" Marina asked hesitantly, bracing for the answer. "That's what's peculiar," Ricardo replied, adjusting his glasses. "We found no record of him having long-term relationships before. You seem to be an exception." Marina stared at her phone again, reading Carlos's message. Her professional instincts screamed at her to disregard it, but her heart wrestled with unanswered questions. "Dr. Ricardo," she said finally, "I think I can help unravel this scheme. But first, I need to know, how much of it was real?" "I strongly advise against meeting him," Ricardo warned, immediately sensing where this was headed. "Carlos Roberto is a master manipulator." Marina's fingers clenched her bag tightly as she sat in the Stark Federal Police office. "I'm not seeking closure to forgive him," she said firmly, "but to forgive myself, for not seeing through him sooner." After lengthy discussions and careful security arrangements, Marina was granted permission to meet Carlos in a monitored room. The meeting was set for the next day. That night, alone in her apartment, Marina went through old messages and photos. One stood out, the day Carlos proposed to her during a picturesque sunset in El Habla. Looking closer, she noticed something she hadn't before, an unspoken conflict in his eyes. At the time, she had mistaken it for raw emotion. The next morning, Marina dressed with deliberate care. She chose a navy blue suit, professional and detached, a stark contrast to the flowery dresses Carlos had always admired. Her hair was neatly tied back in a tight bun, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to wear makeup. The meeting room at the Federal Police Station was cold and clinical, white walls, a rectangular table, and 4 chairs. Marina sat down, feeling the weight of unseen surveillance cameras. Her heart raced as the door opened. Carlos entered, wearing a simple prison uniform, a sharp departure from the tailored Italian suits he used to wear. Yet, his posture remained upright, exuding an air of confidence. "Marina," he said softly, his green eyes locking onto hers. "Why me?" she asked directly, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Carlos exhaled slowly, his cuffed hands resting on the table. At first, it was because of your position at the bank. You were perfect for the plan, smart, successful, with access to the information we needed. Marina's stomach churned, but she refused to let her emotions surface. And after, she pressed. After, Carlos hesitated, running a hand through his now ungelled hair. After, it was you. The way you laughed during our first dinner, the way you wrinkled your nose when you disagreed with something. His voice trailed off, but Marina held her ground, refusing to be swayed by his words, determined to find the truth amidst the deception. Just like you always leave a little coffee at the bottom of the cup, Carlos began. Stop, Marina interrupted sharply. Don't try to turn your calculated observations into poetry. I'm not, Carlos replied, leaning forward slightly. Marina, I've memorized countless habits over the years, it's part of the job. But with you, it was different. For the first time, it wasn't just observation. I started looking forward to every small detail, every little quirk that made you, you. Does that excuse everything? She asked, her voice trembling but steady. No, he admitted plainly. Nothing can justify what I did. But when I realized I was truly falling for you, I panicked. The plan was already in motion. There were people relying on me, and I didn't know how to stop. Marina reached into her bag and slid a piece of paper across the table. Then explain this, she said firmly. Carlos picked up the document, a report on bank transactions. A faint, bittersweet smile crept across his face. You found it, he murmured. The transfers, they weren't all going to offshore accounts. At least, not entirely. What does that mean? Marina pressed. Some of the money was being returned, he admitted. Through legitimate investments in small businesses. When I started falling for you, I tried to minimize the damage. I couldn't stop everything, but I thought, maybe I could give something back, fix at least part of the mess I was creating. Tears welled in Marina's eyes, but she held them back. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? Why let it go as far as the altar? Carlos hesitated, his confident facade cracking. Because I'm a coward, he finally said, his voice raw. Because every day with you made me want to be the man you believed I was. And because. He faltered, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because I hoped that somehow, our love could survive the truth. But I chose the wrong time, the wrong way. And now, I have to live with that. Marina studied the man before her, so different from the one she thought she knew. Gone was the polished, successful businessman with the dazzling smile that charmed entire rooms. In his place sat someone vulnerable, stripped of pretense, and, for the first time, possibly sincere. You know what hurts the most? Marina said, her voice calm but cold. It's not the lies about your past or even the financial scheme. It's knowing that every moment I thought was special had a hidden agenda. Not all of it, Carlos responded, his gaze lingering on the engagement ring she still wore. That surprise trip to Parody for your birthday. Those quiet Sunday mornings making pancakes together. Our long talks about books on the balcony. None of that was part of the plan. Marina's fingers brushed the ring on her hand deliberately. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? At that moment, Patricia entered the room, her presence prearranged with the federal police. She carried a thick folder and sat down beside Marina. Marina, Patricia began, her voice steady. I've spent weeks investigating every detail of your life with Carlos. As a journalist, I have certain resources. She opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and reports. And? Marina asked, her curiosity mixed with apprehension. Patricia continued, in the past few months, Carlos started dismantling his operation. Shell companies were closed, and a significant portion of the money was returned through legitimate channels. Marina's eyes flickered between Carlos and the documents, her emotions a storm of disbelief, anger, and reluctant hope. Carlos lowered his gaze to his cuffed hands, his voice subdued. I wanted to start our marriage with a clean slate. I planned to tell you everything after the honeymoon, once I was certain most of the damage had been undone. And why should we believe that? Patricia challenged, her tone sharp. Marina interrupted, her voice laced with sudden realization. That explains the long business calls, the sudden trips, the mysterious meetings you said were for wedding preparations. A heavy silence filled the room as the weight of these revelations settled over everyone. Marina's emotions swirled in a confusing mix, anger at his betrayal, sorrow for what had been lost, and a faint, inexplicable glimmer of hope. What happens now? Marina asked, her words more directed at herself than anyone else. Dr. Ricardo, who had entered the room unnoticed, answered her. We have a proposal for both of you. He placed a folder on the table and turned to Carlos. Your cooperation over the past few weeks has been invaluable. You've helped dismantle an extensive financial fraud network. Thanks to your information, we've made significant progress. Marina noticed a subtle change in Carlos's posture, a glimpse of the man she had once believed him to be. The prosecution is considering a plea deal, Ricardo continued, in exchange for your full cooperation. This includes the return of stolen funds and your testimony against others involved. Your sentence could be significantly reduced. And what role does Marina play in all of this? Patricia asked, her voice protective. Marina identified patterns in the transactions that even our team overlooked, Ricardo explained. Her expertise in finance, combined with her personal knowledge of the case, could be instrumental in recovering funds for the victims and preventing future schemes. All eyes turned to Marina, the weight of expectation pressing down on her. You're asking me to join the investigation. As a consultant, she clarified. Voluntarily, of course, Ricardo confirmed. It's an opportunity to turn this painful experience into something meaningful. Carlos looked at her, his voice low but steady. You've always wanted to make a difference in the financial world. Maybe this is your chance. Marina's gaze sharpened, her voice firm. Don't you dare use my dreams or ideals to manipulate this situation. The room fell into another uneasy silence. Patricia squeezed Marina's hand in quiet support while Ricardo waited patiently. After a long pause, Marina exhaled deeply. I'll do it, she said at last. Not for you, Carlos, but for the people who were deceived. They deserve to get back what was stolen from them. Wise decision, Ricardo said quietly. We can start next week. Marina nodded and stood. Before leaving, she turned to Carlos one last time. One question. When you said you loved me for the first time, that night in Campos do Jordão, was it true? Carlos met her gaze, his voice raw. It was the first time in my life those words came out without calculation. Maybe the only moment I was completely honest with myself. Marina didn't reply. Slowly, she slipped the engagement ring off her finger and placed it on the table. I hope one day you'll learn to be honest, not just with yourself, but with the world. In the weeks that followed, Marina threw herself into the investigation. Every fraudulent scheme she unraveled, every stolen dollar she helped recover, became a step toward rebuilding not only the trust of those defrauded but also a piece of her own shattered confidence. Each person Marina helped became a step toward her own healing. She realized that while love might sometimes emerge from deceit, it's the choices we make that truly define who we are. 6 months later, on an autumn afternoon, Marina was in her new office at the Financial Task Force when she received an envelope. Inside was a single note. Asterisk, you taught me that it's possible to start over. Thank you for turning my greatest fraud into my greatest lesson. Asterisk. Marina carefully placed the note in her drawer, alongside her old memories. She gazed out the window as the setting sun painted the São Paulo skyline in hues of hope. Love stories don't always end with a traditional, happily ever after. Sometimes, they transform us, shaping us into better versions of ourselves. If this story touched your heart and you'd like to discover more narratives exploring the complexities of relationships and human nature, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Each story is a new opportunity to understand one another more deeply.